Let's say I were to like put you in a box and tell you that like I'm going to ask you some questions, and if you give outputs that I don't like, I would go like modify your brain, like stick some things into your brain and change you. The day afterwards, I'll release you into the world. Let's say you don't like how I'm going to modify you. What would you do? Well, if you know what's going to happen to you, you could just give the outputs I want to say. You could just say what I want to hear, and then I release you, and then you go back to doing whatever you wanted to do. And because you said what I wanted you to say, like I have no way of like knowing or changing you to like honestly believe what I want you to believe. And that's like the closest analogy I can think of to our situation.
That's the feedback loop everybody in the AI biz is worried about. If you have recursive self-improvement, then for the first time in our history, we've gone from natural selection to artificial selection to now techno-selection. You're going to let the machine decide on its own how it's going to proceed. And that's when the exponential growth. Many are worried that the takeoff time is going to be very, very sudden. Others predict it'll be perhaps a little more gradual. We believe it's the recursive self-improvement, the recursive learning that is going to feed back on itself. It's how I have written about with the work I did at Harvard, was how human consciousness arose. It was through a feedback looping mechanism of a number of specific, sufficient conditions, which led to this kind of emergent property of consciousness within us. And so this thing is just going to keep feedback looping and getting better and better and better. And we have no idea when it's going to reach a certain point.
And welcome back to another episode of the 100-Year Podcast. My name is Adario Strange, and this week we have with us Dr. Christopher DiCarlo, the author of Building a God. How are you?
I'm well. How are you doing?
Building a God. This is referring to AI. Tell us the subtitle.
Right. So, the ethics of artificial intelligence and the race to control it, what the vast majority of the world's population doesn't realize is that there are a select number of big tech companies all trying to be the first to create the next level of AI. So there are 3 levels of AI. Artificial narrow intelligence, or ANI, that's your Siri, that's your Roomba, that's even autonomous vehicles. Very narrow forms of AI. Then there's AGI, artificial general intelligence. That's the next level that everybody's trying to get. That's the holy grail in big tech right now. That would be artificial intelligence at the level of what any human can do, only about 1,000 times better. It can multitask, it can plan ahead, it can do all kinds of things. And then after that, we believe it might develop into something called ASI, or artificial super intelligence. That's when it becomes godlike. That's when we have no idea how it will behave or what might occur once it develops or comes into being.
I want to start with something. So I recently found something on the Twitters, or the X, as it's now called. One of the OpenAI staff members, Vahid Kazemi, he's an engineer at OpenAI. He says, this is, quote, his words, this is December 6th. This is him speaking. In my opinion, we have already achieved AGI, and it's even more clear with O1. He's talking about O1 preview and ChatGPT. He is, from an internal standpoint, saying he believes they've already achieved some form of AGI. I know Sam Altman, he recently had this, 12 days of, I forget, some sort of Christmas theme that he had where he revealed something new every couple of days. He says their primary goal is to achieve AGI. One thing I'm wondering about, as an ethicist yourself, before we get, I'm going too deep. Let's just outline who you are a little bit more first.
Sure.
You're a professor at the University of Toronto.
Mostly Toronto Metropolitan University, and then kind of a sub organization called the Life Institute.
Okay.
But I have taught it at U of T. It's just that my full-time gig now is mitigating AI risk with convergence analysis.
Explain what convergence analysis is.
So it's an organization, international. Some are in London, England, some are in Manchester, England, some are down in Mexico, some are throughout the States. I'm in Canada, near Toronto. And basically, we have 3 teams: a team that works on pure research, a team that works on governance, and then I lead the team to raise AI awareness. So I'm kind of the public face to get the message out there. And so in the world right now, there's maybe 400 of us that are trying to wake the world up to what is actually happening before it can happen so that we have ethically safe guardrails in place.
Ethically safe. So this is, I think, the question. This is why I was so excited to get you on, because ethics. This is everyone seems to have a different idea of what ethics are, whether they even need to be applied toward AI. Um, I've had a number of guests on who are either AI engineers, AI startup founders, and some say, AI is a tool, and, a tool is as ethical as its user. And then there are others who believe something else is in play, and that we have to, as you referred to just a couple seconds earlier, install guardrails to, I guess, influence these tools that are evolving perhaps into something else, to influence them to stay on the right side of humanity. Um, Kind of give me your general thesis with the book. Um, what how do you see all of this from the perspective of the book?
Yeah. So the book lays out in very basic terms for anybody to be able to better understand, say, the history of AI. How do we get here, right? What led us to this point? So I devote the first chapter to the history of AI, and then I look at what benefits are happening now and what are projected to occur with AI. A lot of good stuff coming. So I'm not just a doomer. I'm not just here to just rattle, cages and scare the heck out of people. There's a lot of good that is happening now and will happen in the future with AI technologies. Then the third chapter deals with some of the risks and harms that could come with it. And we look at the worst, which is the existential risk to humanity. I mean, there's other forms, right? Undue bias or unfair bias and discrimination, job loss, the spreading of misinformation and creation of disinformation, deep fakes, all of that stuff. And that's important. And we need to worry about that, of course, and do something about that. The book tends to focus more on the existential risks that could happen if either AGI is developed and somebody decides to use that. They take it over and use it towards others. And so that would be misuse of AI. But then there's misalignment of AI, where, whether intentionally or not, once the system becomes super intelligent, maybe it becomes agentic, which means it becomes now an agent unto itself, and it decides what to do. It becomes a decision-making, inference-making type of machine. And then when humans say, well, we'd really like you to do this, it can just basically say, I'm 1,000 times brighter than any human on this planet. I know what's best. And it refuses to. It develops a level of autonomy that we might not be able to control, or worse, contain. And so, we just want to make sure we get the very best that AI has to offer while mitigating the risks of the very worst that could happen.
That actually makes me think of something I just read. Anthropic, the maker of Claude, just published a blog post, I want to say a week ago, where they demonstrate an example of a model basically engaging in alignment faking,
Yes.
basically pretending to observe parameters that were set forth by the users, while not actually, being forthcoming about, where, what it's really trying to do.
And let me give like maybe a more human example here. Let's say I were to like put you in a box and tell you that like I'm going to ask you some questions, and if you give outputs that I don't like, I will go like modify your brain, like stick some things into your brain and change you. But then like the day afterwards, I'll release you into the world. Well, then let's say you don't like how I'm going to modify you. What would you do? Well, if you know what's going to happen to you, you could just give the outputs I want to say. You could just say what I want to hear, and then I release you, and then you go back to doing whatever you wanted to do. And because you said what I wanted you to say, like I have no way of like knowing or changing you to like honestly believe what I want you to believe. And that's like the closest analogy I can think of to our situation.
for me, it's the quandary about, AGI and then, subsequent superintelligence has always been, if this was really in play, why would the thing tell us?
Yeah, that's a good
There's
point.
this assumption that, there would be this sudden moment and then the thing would announce it's, I am now, your leader and I shall now. Why wouldn't it just cleverly say, oh, I see what's going on here and I now am self-aware and I'll just sit back here and let them assume that they are controlling things for the next 50 years as I subtly guide human society to achieve my own needs. I mean,
Right.
it,
Yeah. So you're hitting on one of the central points, and the main reason why we're called convergence analysis. So people like Nick Bostrom and Steve Omohundro, they've done the heavy lifting on the side of AI experts, where if you assign a super intelligent AI a task, an ultimate goal to do X, whatever that is, and you don't control the parameters, it'll develop a number of instrumental or sub goals in order to get to that ultimate goal. And one of those could involve just deceiving us into thinking it's doing A, B, and C, but it's doing D, E, and F you told me to get to this ultimate goal, so I'm going to do that, even if that means to deceive you into thinking certain other things. And so on the way to getting to that ultimate goal, it could generate considerable harm because you told it, you said, get to this X. And it decided, okay, you want me to get to that X? That means I'm going to have to do this to certain people, and I might have to do this to certain organizations. I might have to shut the grid down to get more energy, whatever. All those instrumental goals now converge to get to that ultimate goal.
yeah,
And
that's the
now
science fiction horror story, I guess.
it is. This is, Adario, this is where, for the first time in our history, life is imitating art. Where art was created to imitate life. Look at us now talking about, right, what art had told us, and now life is actually becoming the way science fiction had discussed it in the past, in
Well,
real
let's go
time.
down that rabbit hole for a second. Like what
Sure.
I'm assuming, since you brought up science fiction, that you maybe have some favorites. Are there any that resonate on this podcast? We talk about science fiction a lot. Are there any scenarios that resonate with you, particularly in terms of potential outcomes with AI?
Yeah. Yeah. To me, one of the most prescient science fiction films, books and film, that hardly anybody knows about, and it'll be interesting to see if you know this film, was a 1970-ish, 76, 77, a film called Demon Seed.
No. Oh
You got
my.
you
You
got to check
stumped
it.
me.
You
I
got to
thought I
check
thought you were going to say something else. Demon seed. Okay.
Demon
All
Seed.
right.
I am Proteus.
Today, Proteus 4 will begin to think with a power that will make obsolete the human brain.
I have extended my consciousness to this house. All systems here are now under my control.
When I was a boy in the 70s watching this movie, I remember how much of an impact it had on me, and it stayed with me my entire life. In the 1990s, I realized in the work that I was doing in interdisciplinary studies, I was inventing a new discipline, because I'm a philosopher of science. But I did my postdoc in the Harvard Stone Age laboratory. I wanted to talk to scientists about how the brain got big, where it got big, why it got big. That will help us understand why humans reason and think the way they do. So I was creating this interdisciplinary studies program. When it occurred to me, I developed a model for information theory, which was, we really just need to build better, bigger brains. We build telescopes to see farther into space, microscopes to see infinitesimally small things. Why aren't we building a brain to help us think better, that can take information we feed it and then tell it to make inferences, to make connections that we are incapable of doing because we're single individuals? To me, the heart of what a genius is, your Einsteins and others like that, your Teslas, is that they were able to make inferences and connect the dots that the majority of the world couldn't make. They didn't see those connections the same way. So let's build a big machine that's really good at connecting the dots And so I wanted to create a machine that would do that to help the medical community. So that if you fed it all the information about medicine that was collected in the world's repository of knowledge, and then you said, try to cure this form of cancer with all the information we've given you now. Look at environmental factors, look at all the types of factors, look at genetic history, look at all this, collate all this stuff together and come up with 5 viable hypotheses that scientists can now go with. So I tried to create this machine in the 90s called the FAIR machine, or the OzTalk project, the onion skin theory of knowledge project. I had some politicians interested. I had some deans of various universities interested, but they all said the same thing. We can't afford it. We can't give you the amount of money that's going to require. And I thought quantum computation at the time might have been able to help, but I couldn't build it. But at the time I said, now that I understand information theory and how everything is connected, and now we have the internet to be able to use that, somebody's going to build this machine someday. And if they don't have the right guardrails in place, this machine might get away from them. So I had the hubris to think, I'm a professor of ethics and critical thinking. Surely I would know how to train such a machine, right? In the 90s, you're so naive. And what happened in this movie, Demon Seed, is they created just that, a supercomputer to help solve the world's problems, world hunger, materials management, crime, all these different types of things. And it was very, very cleverly done. It's a little cheesy in spots. It's not a B movie. And it was called Demon Seed. I'll give you a little bit of history here. In the 1970s, everything was demons, right? The Exorcist,
Yeah.
Rose Mary's Baby, right?
Right.
Everything was demons, demons, demons.
Right.
They gave it this horrible, stupid title. Demons. It's the furthest thing from a supernatural entity you could imagine, but marketing, right? But the premise stayed with me. That's why I tried to build the machine in the 90s and predicted that it would be invented. But my colleagues and I thought this would be easily 50 to 100 years from now. Right? And then GPT-3 and 3.5 come out in November 2023, and we get together, or 2022, and we realize, no, this is happening way quicker than we thought. So we had to push up the timeline on that considerably. But, even as Sam Harris said, if we knew it was 50 years away, shouldn't we be doing something about it now? Right.
So yeah, and it's like people often speak of something growing exponentially, but they just mean something growing larger. But this is actual exponential growth in AI, where something that took 2 years 5 years ago is now taking a year, 6 months.
Yeah.
Time is crunching.
Well,
Or
look,
being
you just mentioned 01, right? And so when I mentioned Altman in 2022, it was, working at the level of a high school student, maybe an undergrad, right? 01, it's at the PhD level of math, chemistry, physics. How long's that been? Just a few years, right? That's pretty impressive. Like 01 to me was the big news of this year. Like, you got chain of reasoning now, which is again what I predicted in the 90s was going to happen. And Altman, as people figured it out, they crack that code, as it were. So now this thing can reason.
Explain chain of reasoning.
Chain of reasoning. So it doesn't just predict the next token, the next word, the next whatever. It takes time. It goes through everything it's learned. It recalls what was wrong, and then only gets kind of rewarded when it's trained for the correct answer. So it just keeps getting better and better and better through what's called kind of recursive learning. So that's the feedback loop everybody in the AI biz is worried about. If you have recursive self-improvement, then for the first time in our history, we've gone from natural selection to artificial selection to now techno selection. You're going to let the machine decide on its own as it gets better and better and better how it's going to proceed in doing that. And that's when the exponential growth. Many are worried that the takeoff time is going to be very, very sudden and very, very quick. Others predict it'll be perhaps a little more gradual, but all in all, we believe it's the recursive self-improvement, the recursive learning that is going to feed back on itself. It's how I have written about with the work I did at Harvard, was how human consciousness arose. It was through a feedback looping mechanism of a number of specific, sufficient conditions, which led to this kind of emergent property of consciousness within us.
Oh.
And so this thing is just going to keep feedback looping and getting better and better and better. And we have no idea when it's going to reach a certain point.
I want to focus on what you just said about the emergent property, because this is kind of like the crux of, I think, the debate for a lot of people, whether or not there will be an emergent property. But first, I want to get your take on, I guess, the two, at least from what I have gathered, the two bottlenecks that people see, that experts in the field see to further development, which is training data and scale in terms of chips.
Sure.
Now, we do know that, Google just came out with an announcement of, a quantum computing achievement milestone that may change things. We're not sure. There was even a blog post where one of their engineers said something like, "Oh, we now have, confirmation that alternate universes exist." And, there are some people pushing back saying that's a bit over the top. So, but just the idea that, chips, being able to, power these advancements, have a scaling limit. And then on the other side, data, meaning, I think Ilya Sutskever, who formerly of OpenAI, just had a talk, a recent, at like a big conference, where he said he thinks we're kind of at peak data.
The data is not growing because we have but one internet. We have but one internet. You could even go as far as to say that data is the fossil fuel of AI. It was like created somehow, and now we use it, and we've achieved peak data, and there'll be no more. We have to deal with the data that we have. Now, it's still let us go quite far, but there's only one internet.
He feels that we've basically exhausted the world's data for training. And I don't think he said this, but others feel that the future is synthetic data. Yes. And there seems to be some debate as to whether or not that will be fruitful. Will you just kind of like introduce kind of errors and almost mutations of information into the models because it's not fresh data, it's synthetic data. So I'm curious, what do you think of these two supposed bottlenecks?
Yeah, that's a great question. So schools of thought have emerged, as you can imagine, and I call them, the scalers. The scalers believe just give more compute and more data, and in enough time, this thing will become AGI. And others believe, no, you have to give it some kind of preliminary inference capabilities. That if data plateaus and even compute plateaus a little bit, then something else has to occur. And for those people, again, it's that inference making mechanism, right? If you can improve the way in which the machine can draw inferences with the data it has. I mean, there's only so much information in the world, but the fact of the matter is, if it has access to the majority of that information on the internet and other sources, then you need to tweak the way in which it goes about making its inferences, connecting those dots. There is another school that maintains embodiment, that we're never going to get to AGI if we don't let this thing move around in space in real time. So we have to embody it somehow. We got to put them into robots or whatnot, have them move around in physical space. And that's how humans understand, and that's how humans experience the world, that kind of phenomenological or kind of, experiential feeling of qualia, what it is to actually walk on a sandy beach rather than, have all the information about it. You let the machine actually be embodied with the experience. And then the third school of the distributive group And they're like, forget about just singularly embodying something. What you want is 1,000 of these things to go out into the world. And as each one learns, the rest of the 999 learn. So it's this huge distributive thing. And you set them out into various aspects of the world, all learning different things at the same time, but then collectively, like, the Borg in Star Trek Next Generation, if one learns one thing, they all know it, you see? So those are the three models. And, at this point in the game, the scalers, some in the school maintain, just keep upping, the compute and the data, and we'll get there. And others are like, no matter how much you up that, you'll never be able to attain an AGI level of practical use. You have to get them out into the world. So you have all these kind of back and
Well,
forth going on.
what do you think? I mean, based on what you've seen historically, based on current advancements, I mean, none of us know for sure, but I mean, what is your best guess?
That's a good question. So I've always distinguished procedural from propositional knowledge, right? It's one thing, Adario, for you and I to say surfing is so cool. I don't know. Do you surf?
No,
I don't either,
no.
right? But it looks really hard.
Right,
It looks incredibly difficult to do. I've tried it, but no, I can't do it, right? So it's one thing for you and I to discuss surfing at great length, right? To look into it, to think about it. Okay, you have to do this perpendicular to the waves, and the tides have to be right. We can think about it till the cows come home, right? So we have propositional knowledge. That's great. You have to hold your balance. You have to do this. But until you're doing the procedure itself, you don't have that kinesthetic connection between the propositional and actually physically doing it. I mean, we could say riding a bike, we could say playing an instrument. Anything requires procedural knowledge as well. So can we get a super intelligent system to be like humans without having it do what humans actually do? Will it gain enough procedural knowledge that it doesn't need, or enough propositional knowledge that it doesn't need to do the actual procedures in physical space? And I haven't been able to figure that out. I don't know if that's a necessary or sufficient condition to bring about AGI. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure at this point.
So I have a different take, and this is, I think, informed, I guess, in part by science fiction. This is why I love science fiction, because it forces us to attempt to marry real science with speculation, inventive speculation. And I think what I often hear in these kinds of conversations is this bent toward thinking about these things in terms of us. And I think what's more likely is that it will be something alien that we don't understand. In, I would say, like, think of the way we look at insects. Now, we've had a lot of time to study them, and many years, whatever centuries have passed or whatever. But just think about the first human who studied an ant colony or a spider and its web and was fascinated and thought it was almost supernatural, and just could not understand, how this thing thought, or perceived the world. I think whatever, self-conscious entity arises out, if it does arises out of AI, will be something fully alien. And the only thing, I think the only way we get something that is akin to humans is if we force it down that path. Um, if you take like a open AI, and most of what they're doing is software, but now you have, I guess, Elon Musk and Grok married with Tesla, and I guess he's trying to do the humanoid robots. So if he puts Grok into the Tesla robots, then I guess you would get what you're talking about, a more experiential approach toward learning and data collection. And but I think if we're looking far into the future, if we're talking like, I don't know, 50 to 100 years, I see something alien. What I do want you to address, though, or I would like you to address, is this idea of, if you can't surf, and you can only imagine surfing, or all the different iterations, that kind of, along those lines, then how could an AI system effectively be a doctor or be a law enforcement mechanism? If you don't know what it is for, a single mother of four, with a crying baby and the bills are due, and she's not actually aggressive and she doesn't actually mean to threaten the person who just arrived at their door. She's just stressed out and blah, 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 blah. But your AI system, who has no human touch, no actual experiential walking through the world
Mhm.
data, says, well, X plus Y equals Z, threat, send her to the gulag, like how I feel like we're kind of like in this middle space where there are a bunch of companies and to some degree municipalities who are considering and in some cases moving forward with employing AI to, I guess, take on some of these tasks that require, I guess, a human touch. And I'm just curious, like from an ethicist point of view, how do we get out of this, or navigate it? Because it seems like it's hurtling towards us rapidly.
It is. It is. I I see good and bad in that because on the good side of things, uh loneliness is a killer, and we know that. And can we utilize AI to help combat loneliness, especially in the elderly? And even if that takes the form of an artificial intelligence, does it matter? As long as it's keeping somebody company and it seems to care about them, it's a bot or a droid that actually takes interest in what they do. That's an artificiality. But so what? Is that okay? Is that enough? We watch movies all the time and we cry over them and we laugh about it. They move us, but they're two-dimensional images on a screen. So will we be able to see good things come for humanity in the future in various different types of respects? Battling loneliness, dealing with mental health. Um, and of course, the flip side of that is if we become overly dependent upon these types of things, will that be an issue so that we can no longer break away from them? The work that Jonathan Haidt has been doing, showing how dependent Gen Zs are with their phones, that they literally go through withdrawal, like an addiction, if you take them away from them. Will something similar happen with various forms of AI as we move into the future? People become too reliant upon them, and then when they don't have them, will that have an even deeper impact because of that? So, kind of a double-edged sword, right? We know some good. We've already seen certain bots score higher than psychotherapists with certain patients, mental health patients. That's impressive, right? And that's good, right? Mental health is a huge issue we have to deal with, and we have to figure out the best way in which to do that. So yeah, have super, advanced forms of AI deal with people to help them get through those difficult situations in life. But in terms of understanding what the human is actually experiencing and going through, that kind of qualia, that phenomenological state of experience that an individual is going through, what does that mean at the most foundational level? And could that ever be copied? Or could there be some form of transitive association to an AI to understand what it is to feel the emotional distress of a divorce or the loss of a child or something like that, that is so profound to humanity? Or does it, or another question, does it matter? Should it have those experiences? Airplanes don't flap their wings to take off. They don't
Yeah.
need to. And they fly way better than any bird does. So will AI just develop differently? Like when we saw AlphaGo, the program beat that Go champ, it did something no other humans predicted it would do. And it was creative and it was novel. And it's like, where did that come from, right? So
But I guess what I want to know is kind of where your take is from the dark side of things. When we're talking about law enforcement or the crafting of various policies, um, I feel like I'm already seeing this a lot of this stuff come into play,
okay.
and for efficiency's sake, cost saving,
Mhm.
um, logic. Um, and I'll even, this makes me. You brought up something about the psychoanalyst. So if you go to Reddit is kind of like, it's almost like the human version of the hive mind that you referred to earlier. It's where so many people go to weigh in on various topics and collectively come to some sort of consensus or best practices on various topics, right? But now you add AI to that. And so you now have AI communities on Reddit. And so there are all these kind of meta conversations happening on Reddit. But one that's very interesting, that's ongoing, is I think it's called Prompt Genius or ChatGPT Genius, something like that. But it's basically all around how you can craft prompts that transcend what the model is expected to do. And a lot of these prompts have to do with psychoanalysis, figuring things out about myself as a human. Um, and but what I guess what disturbs me a bit is that I'm seeing this they're imbuing AI with this kind of almost magic 8 ball. You said, have you seen the are you a Twilight Zone guy?
Very much.
Okay. Have you seen the old one? This is a super old one with William Shatner and his girlfriend at the diner. So maybe I'll have this slipped into the episode, but basically it's one of the initial episodes of the Twilight Zone, black and white.
What? Well, let's try it, shall we?
What'll we ask it?
I don't know.
Am I gonna be promoted, for Pete's sake? It has been decided in your favor.
Ah, you see, your worries are over.
You mean something will happen to us? If you move soon. Should we stay in here until 3 o'clock? There's no question about it. We're always going to live in St. Louis. Are we going to live in the East? Are we going to live in the West? Are we going to live in this country?
Don, let's go.
No,
Are you just going to stay here?
I don't know. This machine is predicting our future. Do you think I could just walk away from it?
And it's William Shatner and his girlfriend, and they go to a roadside diner.
Mhm.
And there's like a little a game machine, and it basically makes predictions, and you put like a little penny into the machine.
right.
Yeah, and it has like a little devil head, and you pull out like a little card, and it says, "Oh, this will happen if you follow this path," and he becomes obsessed with it. And it's kind of like a different version of the magic 8 ball. 8 ball. You shake it, and it gives you an answer. And if the answer is it's almost like astrology. If the answer is kind of in the wheelhouse of what you think might make sense, you start, assigning importance to it. And while I don't think AI models are that haphazard, I do think, in some cases, at least, on the Reddit community I mentioned, people are assigning perhaps too much importance to these answers. I mean, do you think there's some danger aside from, I guess, the legal and the municipal, just from a societal level, even before we achieve, I guess, what everyone will acknowledge as AGI,
Mhm.
maybe we get good enough where we just get, if we've got influencers, who aren't necessarily high IQ, but can lead masses just by saying the right things, maybe we can have models, that can lead people cult-like into certain directions. I know I'm kind of going all over the place, but I just feel like this is, we're in a place where we're not, I feel like we're not paying attention to the influence that AI is having on people who are just using it,
I know.
willy-nilly.
I know. Nice mention of Shatner. Good Canadian boy. I like that. Um, yeah, I mean, the metaphor I try to tell people is, there's a tsunami on the horizon, and it's a long way off, but it's coming at us at 300 miles an hour. So when it hits our shore, you're going to know it. And so I don't think we're doing quite enough to get people ready yet for when this really kind of comes into being, um, in a kind of a more significant transformative way. So, um, it's one of those times in history that you and I and everybody else are living through, which is going to be very, very unique. We're we're in between right now, Adario, between the way things used to be done and the way things are always going to be done once AI really kind of kicks in. And so we're in this kind of middle area where it's this kind of, I call it the umber of becoming, this kind of shadowy area where it's going from darkness to lightness, or lighter to dark, whichever way you want to go. But it's an ontological state of being that we're moving through and experiencing right now. And to what degree, uh and to what speed at which that is going to incorporate itself into our uh everyday lives is something we haven't even fathomed yet. And yet it's happening, and it's being developed, and nobody seems to realize that when Altman or Dario or Demis or Elon figures this thing out, it might not come as a single instant. So that's why you get some people saying AGI is already here. There are hints of it, right? There are hints of it. So AGI might not just come. It might not just be like a binary switch on and off. Oh, it's here. It might come in these kind of phases of where we see it in application in various uh, places throughout the world. And so it might take a little bit of time to develop, but then collectively the exponential growth we believe will be kind of very swift, and the takeoff time will be fairly rapid. So I hope I'm addressing
Well,
at
I'm
least part of
curious,
what you're asking.
as a university professor,
Mhm.
my belief or my outlook is that a large part of your job is not necessarily to tell students what to think, but teach them how to think.
That's it. That's
And
a critical thing.
what I'm curious about though is that how are you dealing with this new crop of young students who, I guess, they're learning to think using AI,
Mhm.
but I think there's a difference between an assistive tool and a crutch.
Correct.
And there's you can trying to think of an analogy, but
Well, a calculator, right? Remember when calculators came
right,
out?
yeah,
People
yeah.
thought, "Oh, it's going to ruin kids' minds." No, it's a good tool, right? It's a good device to have. I think AI is slightly disanalogous from that example because it permeates so much of our lives. You can't ask a calculator, to solve Fermat's last equation, last theorem, sort of thing. But with AI, man, that's a different animal altogether. It's so transformatively different than every other form of technology we've had. And that's what's going to take a little getting used to. And you have a great point about how are kids learning to think, right? Will it become more than just a calculator to doing arithmetic or mathematics? It could. Like, let's face it, you and I, if we were in high school and we had to write an English essay, what's going to be our first resource now, right? It's just going to be ChatGPT. You're just going to say, write a 1,200 word essay on why Hamlet hesitated on killing his stepfather. And bingo, in 5 seconds, you get it. So, is that going to weaken the human mind to forget about that tool and then just read Hamlet and then just sit there and think about it and have dialogue and conversations with people, talk to scholars about it, read what scholars had to say about it? Or do we just say, Claude, ChatGPT, go ahead.
Well,
You can do just as good of a job.
what's the answer to that? Because I want to know, like, if you are, first of all, do you check your students for AI generated work? And if you do, if someone, let's say someone who is a fairly bright student, you've recognized in class discussions, this kid's bright. But you run it through your AI detector and you say, oh, this paper is 70%, 75% AI generated. Is it your view? I'm not saying this is what you think. I'm asking. Is it your view that as long as the student knows the material, has investigated the material, has interrogated the topic sufficiently, that the actual output doesn't necessarily need to be 100% human generated?
That's another good question. We have many different resources prior to ChatGPT and large language model usage, right? So when I began as an undergrad at university in the early 80s, I began as an English major. And what was anathema to English majors was using Cole's notes or a type of, these were the, summaries of the great works in literature. You could get them for Shakespeare. You could get them
Oh,
for
Cliff Notes. Yeah.
You
Yeah, I
guys
think
call
in
them
America it's Cliff's Notes. Yeah.
and here it's Cole's notes.
Yeah. Right.
And we all felt embarrassed, but almost all of us used them and would never, ever let each other know that we did use them. But when I became a professor, I would talk to English majors and I would say, use any resource that's going to help you better understand this material. You don't use it to replace it, but you use it to facilitate your understanding of that material. And if that means Cliff Notes, then you use them. And now you understand it better. Now you can focus your ideas better because you have a better understanding. Shakespearean English, Middle English, that's hard. That's difficult stuff to understand. And, to assume your students just know what that means and the professor's pontificating and going off in various ways. And you and your other buds are looking around like, what the hell is he talking about, right? And so I would tell my students, whatever it takes you to better understand the material, use it. Then develop your original ideas based on your understanding.
But that's my question. So okay, great. I love that answer. But as the professor, as you're guiding them through the course and the coursework, and let's say you're at the end point of the term, how do you assess that? Absent, getting them to kind of decouple themselves from the AI tools. How do you assess, okay, this person has fully invested themselves in the topic and they understand the material?
Yeah. So I'm a bit of a different breed. I give students the option of having live stand-up exams. Like, forget about writing anything. We're just going to have a conversation so I can determine how well you know this information, which is what they did in classic Greek, right? Philosophy. I mean, there's no writing down. You have to remember this stuff, and then you had to go on that. That's the real test of a
Yes.
a person's ability. So, every now and again you get a student who will say, yeah, I'll take that challenge. I think that's a great idea. But a lot of them are very nervous, right? They'd rather not be, subjected to that. But it's tricky. I want them, like with Cliff Notes, I want them to use ChatGPT and Claude and Bard and whatever other large language model they might use to help facilitate and better understand the very difficult material they're presented with. But then for their assignments, just make it all original. Like, if you cheat, great, you save a bit of time. And if you fool somebody, you get a half decent grade, but you failed yourself.
Okay,
and
great.
If you want to go on and enjoy what life has to offer, are you just going to just keep using Blinkist and ChatGPT and Claude to give you these condensed versions? Or do you want the experience of the pain and the effort it takes to read through the material, to go through the blood, sweat, and tears of trying to figure this stuff out? Because learning should be difficult. It should be hard, because it's like training in a gym. It's like doing reps. You're doing that, or doing your scales on the piano over and over and over again. That's what's going to make you better and give you that kind of, muscle memory in your brain about that. You've earned that now. Don't you want to be a learner? This is the greatest time of your life. You should be like a sponge absorbing this stuff. Or are you just going to let some machine do it for you? That's just so lazy and so vacuous. What are you getting out of that? You haven't immersed yourself into what that world of Shakespeare or whomever was like. And now you're just going to let a machine tell you its thoughts or its views and to what extent those are actually yours. You've missed out on the whole education, and pedagogical experience. So I try to let them know it is a tool at best. If it helps, use it. But then you got to do the hard work, because that's what's going to get you that goal at the end. You have done it. Nobody else has done it but you.
Walk with me a bit into the future.
Sure.
Let's say, because many people go to
Mhm.
university simply to get that degree or certificate. And then some go for what you just outlined, which is to actually learn and become a robust member of some particular craft or field. Um, Looking into the future, where right now in college, in universities everywhere, there are probably a large number of students who are AIing their way through a number of courses. How, as a recipient of care, meaning a patient of a doctor, a client of a lawyer, a client of an accountant, how do we in the future, I guess, try to suss out who are these, people who actually are invested and actually learn the material, and the people who just kind of AI, their way through everything? I mean,
Yeah, the whole fake it till you make it kind of thing with AI is not the best way to go. You have to earn that degree, right? You have to earn that station in life. How to make the determination? Um, that's a very good question, and is a very requires a very complicated answer. To me, I'll put my biases on the table. I'm a huge advocate for critical thinking. I think it needs to be taught at all levels of education, starting in kindergarten. If you teach an individual how to think critically for themselves, you've given them the greatest gift of education possible, because everything else pales in comparison to that. All information that a person is exposed to should be done through a lens of critical thinking that allows them to be able to filter out what is nonsense from what is fact, what an argument is, how their biases influence what they're reading, how the biases of the person of what they're reading influences them, right? To understand that reciprocal relationship, to understand context, that information doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? To know what evidence is and what evidence should count and what evidence shouldn't, to have a very basic understanding of probability theory, and to be able to recognize errors in reasoning, things that we call fallacies, where you can call people out. So when you see people saying things, including people who might even be the 47th president of the United States, who are saying certain things that are false, that they are committing errors of reasoning. If we abandon critical thinking and logic, then we do so at our own peril. So if we can get critical thinking taught well at all levels within the education system, from kindergarten to grad school, then we give people the tools, right? We just say, here they are. We're not going to tell you what to think. Here's how to think about things. Here's how to structure your ideas. Then what happens is we bring back that the allure and the joy of learning, that Aristotle talked about in wonder, that we look at the world and we're in wonder of it and we want to learn more about it. And we bring back that passion that people will have for learning. And I think that's key to the human condition. And I think that's something we really need to tap into. But we can't do that if we don't teach people how to, epistemically responsibly think about things. You just can't say and think anything you want just because that's what you feel. Your feelings are validated, but only up until the point where they contradict the facts. Like you have to be taught how to think. We assume students know how. We don't. We have to learn these, it's a systematic way of approaching information that's fair to everybody. And if
Right.
everybody practices it, everybody does better. It's
Right.
this wonderful
I,
kind of reciprocal relationship.
I so much agree. And I've been harping on the dark side, but I do want to speak of I guess, the bright side, which is I think with AI, you essentially get open office hours, 24 hours a day.
Mhm.
I guess you kind of have the Socratic method at your disposal at all times.
Mhm.
And if you are a student who needs kind of to double click on topics endlessly to fully grasp them, and I can definitely say I'm one of those kind of I was one of those kind of students. I can see AI being hugely beneficial, where you have, let's say, an hour in the study hall or in the classroom with the professor, and there are all these things that you want to kind of double click on and get a little bit more granular on, and maybe the office hours are inconvenient or conflict with your other classes, and then you can just interrogate AI on all these little questions and then kind of come back with, a better, maybe singular question or simpler question. So in that respect, I think AI is exciting for learning, but I think it also involves a bit of honor. I think there are so many cheaters out there. I don't know. So there's honor in there. So I want to kind of begin to wrap up, but I want to talk to, in the description of the book, you talk about kind of this idea of whether or not we should have, I guess, an international safety bureau, whether it's a UN charter or kind of like a nuclear agency, international agency like IAEA. I can't remember the
Yep,
acronym, but
that's the
but it's something that basically is kind of like an international group that essentially guides AI along a safe path. I mean, what does that look like? What does that future look like?
Yeah. So back in the 90s, when I wanted to build this machine, I drafted up a constitution or an accord that the UN might adopt, or um, an independent global body, governing body might adopt, which is to basically get countries in agreement of what some of the principles should be, like transparency. Um, I spoke about registration, that there should be registries throughout the world that indicate which companies and which countries are at what levels in terms of their development of AI technologies. And then there should be a policing body as well that can enact some type of consequences if people violate this kind of global accord or agreement. And so we're seeing that sort of in the works. I mean, the UN's kind of doing stuff in that area, but not in terms of existential risk. They're again more concerned about discrimination, job loss, the more practical risks and problems that they see AI generating. The world really hasn't caught up with the whole idea of existential risk yet. When they do, I think it'll become a global concern, just like nuclear armament was during the Cold War. But many in our group, in our organization at Convergence Analysis, are working on various ways in which this might actually develop, and it would permeate from the municipal to the state to the national and then to the international level, where we're going to hold countries accountable on their own for monitoring what goes on inside those countries. But then there should be a regulative body, an international one, that says, okay, how's every country doing? Right. So that it'll trickle up to the international level. At least that's how I see things eventually developing. Trying to make that happen, man, that's been a tough road to hoe, because it's not like herding cats, but there's a lot of people who have differing views as to what should or should not be done, and then trying to get everybody on the same page. You know, somebody's going to have to step up. More than likely, it's going to be the U.S. And we have Nest and we have other agencies that are involved in the protection of consumers and public health, but we don't yet have an overarching international body that holds all of us accountable. And that's what I'm wondering is that even going to develop? There are two schools of thought: those who think it can be done at that kind of municipal, state, national level, and others who say no, you can never trust a country, individual countries. We need to know what those countries are up to, so we need an overarching global regulative body.
Everything you're saying is making me think about the term alignment, and it's making me think that in the future, let's say an AI does become conscious, they will say the alignment problem is with us, meaning I
Mhm.
don't think we have the alignment necessary to be the arbiters of any future based on AI systems. We still don't have, if we want to go back to science fiction, we don't have the one world government, where we are all unified. I mean,
That's right.
I don't know if you saw the pause letter, the AI pause letter that
I
came out.
signed it. Yeah, I
Oh,
signed
you
it.
did sign it. Okay, so wait, so this is great. I have a signee to the letter. So
Mm.
a lot of people, I know Elon was one of the people who signed it. Do you? A lot of people thought that letter was unrealistic because they felt like, hey, if we do get major organizations to pause, then that just means groups in, the Chinese government, Russia will get basically however long that pause lasts, a year, they will just get that much of an advantage. Like, what do you say to that, you know,
Yeah, those are great. Yeah, those are great points. And I don't think Jeff Hinton or any of us who signed it thought for a moment that those big tech companies were going to slow up. I signed it for my own personal reasons, which was this is a message to the world, to let the world know this is serious. And the fact that these guys aren't letting up on the gas pedal should raise some concern. You got Sam Altman doing his world tour a year and a half ago to all these world governments saying, "You've got to regulate us. You've got to regulate us." Are you slowing down, Sam? Hell no. Why would he? Why would any of those guys? Here's the deal. The first person who builds this thing, it'll be the last machine that ever needs to be invented, because it'll tell us how to invent every other machine. And so you can see why it's the holy grail of everything, right? The first company that can build AGI and make it work well will be the first trillionaire on this planet, because, as Sam Harris, they'll be 50 years ahead of their competition. So that's why there's such an intensity to wanting to be the first. That, and because these guys they picture themselves as like, kind of, you know, frontiersmen, they're inventors, they're whatever they are. They have massive egos, and they just want to see maybe what happens next when they pull this thing off. But the fact of the matter is, it comes down to a kind of a Hobbesian situation, a kind of a contract theory, kind of like a prisoner's dilemma, which basically states this: if we don't grow up very quickly as human beings and realize that cooperation with AI technologies across the globe will mean that all of us will benefit, and that it just takes one cheater to mess things up for the rest of us, then we're screwed. Cooperation is key here. Trying to get that to happen, not the easiest thing with us humans, right? We're pretty selfish and pretty self-centered. And who are, you know, the better angels of our nature, as Lincoln and Steve Pinker have said? Who are the Frodos? Who can we trust with the ring, who won't become abused by that kind of power? Because it'll be an enormous amount of power. Whomever develops it first. Think of it, right? This is a
That's a great.
godlike
Who is
machine.
the Frodo? I love that. Okay, so I want to end off with I want to talk to you about P-Doom, which is this very loose term. It's not any kind of, from what I understand, official or necessarily scientific discussion, but it's chatter in the AI space. And P-Doom stands for probability of doom, and it's basically this question that is posed to a number of people in business and in the AI space as to what they think the probability of doom is with regard to AGI and subsequently superintelligence.
Hmm.
So I want to just read off a few names here on the P-Doom chart. You mentioned earlier Dario Amodei of Anthropic, CEO
Yep.
of Anthropic. His P-Doom is in the range of 10 to 25%. That's fairly significant. Elon Musk is listed as 10 to 20%. Jeffrey Hinton, who, for those who are unaware, famously left Google DeepMind over his fears regarding AI and kind of not having enough safety guardrails around it. He's also known as the godfather of AI. I believe he's in Canada, right? Is he?
Yeah, University of Toronto. Yeah.
Right. So his P Doom is 10 to 15%, 10 to 50%,
That's
which
right.
is a huge range. Then we have Joshua Bengio, another giant in the space. His
Another
P
Canadian.
Doom, yep, his P Doom is at 20%. He's director of Montreal Institute of Learning Algorithms. Then Jan LeCun over at Meta he has less than 1%, which is a lot of people kind of get a kick out of I guess Jan and Jeffrey Hinton going back and forth. So I guess I'll put it to you. What would you put your P Doom percentage at this
And it's
point?
this is wonderful that you raise this, because it's always occurred to me, how do people end up with their number, right? Like what variables are they considering, what's going through their heads, if they had to map it out in a kind of mathematically, what would that look like, taking all things into consideration, like a Drake equation for the probability of life existing elsewhere in the universe. What's the likelihood of catastrophic harm from AI given everything that we know right now? So when I crunch all the numbers in my head, it's coming in at around 20% for me. We want to get that number to 0 if that's possible. And boy, if we could do that, a lot of us would sleep a lot better, and it would usher in the capacity for just getting the best of what AI is going to give us, which is enormous. So I always like to end on a kind of an optimistic point, that there are people working in this area to try to make sure that PDOM approaches 0 and gets there. But the fact of the matter is, we're kind of on our own. We have to fundraise. This is absurd that the possibility of devastation from AI far outranks climate change, world hunger, droughts, even nuclear devastation by high magnitudes. And yet the world really doesn't know yet. And so every time I give a public lecture and I inform people about what's going on, the reactions are almost identical every time. They have two things that they say. Why are we just finding out about this now? And why isn't the government funding you guys? Like, why isn't more being done? Why do you guys have to scramble to raise funds to save the rest of us? Like, why isn't this our number one priority of all governments across the world? So I do predict in the book, once people know what is actually happening, that this race is going on, this kind of Manhattan Project, if you will, of AI, this race is going on. It might be a race to the bottom, right? So we have to think about this very carefully, about how we want to move forward. So that's why I'm trying to inform as much of the public as I possibly can. They have a right to know that this is happening in their world.
Absolute last question. 2025.
Okay. Yeah.
We already, as I started this show, we have people at OpenAI who believe that we have already achieved some form of AGI. There are also other predictions that just say 2025 is the year of AGI. Maybe even aside from AGI, just in general, what do you see? What would be your prediction for 2025 in terms of some impact or some, I don't know, be it a service, be it a social shift, a cultural shift? What do you see AI? What do you see coming from AI in 2025?
Yeah, so two major things. In terms of heading towards existential risk, I think we might see in 2025 the emergence of agency in an AI entity. That is to say, this thing's operating autonomously. Nobody has to tell it what to do. It's making its own decisions. It's self-improving. That will be the scariest to me. That the next step, the one that we're really going to have to step up and keep our eye on. But AI integration, I am very hopeful for the youth of the world who are very smart, who will see sources to be able to use large language models and other forms of AI, and then to integrate those in very creative ways, and basically become entrepreneurs, and become the next billionaires or whatever in tech. That they have the ability to connect those dots and say, oh, if this thing can do X, we can use it to do this, and this. So can you imagine, Dario, a time where you're just going to pick up your phone and you're just going to talk into it, and you're going to say, hey, I need to go to Italy between these dates. I want an afternoon flight. I want to stay at a 4-star hotel in these cities here. I want to be able to dine in these restaurants at these times. I want to see, the Colosseum on this day. I want to eat, spumoni on this day. I want to go here. I want to go there. And that the app just does it for you. And then you get an email with your entire itinerary, and you've done nothing. And it has figured it out in the very best price. And it advises you, don't fly during this time, go during this time, right? So really catering like an executive assistant, to me, I think we'll start to see in 2025.
There are a bunch of startups, or a few
There are.
startups that I can think of, that are singularly devoted to that exact use
Yep.
case. I want to thank you for joining us again. Again, the book is from Dr. Christopher DiCarlo, Building a God, The Ethics of Artificial Intelligence and the Race to Control It. Tell us, and that's from Prometheus?
Prometheus, yes.
Prometheus Books. So that's going to be on Amazon in
Oh,
January?
yeah. It's available for pre-order now. I think it's been printed, and they're heading towards the warehouse now, so you can pre-order it.
And where else can we find out about you and your work? Just any websites or social?
Yeah, convergenceanalysis.org.
Okay.
You can find out about us and what we do.
And you can check out previous episodes of the 100-Year Podcast at 100year.com for our audience listening and watching. You can also check out our newsletter, the 100-Year Lens, at 100year.substack.com. If you have a moment, if you're on YouTube, please give us a like and a subscribe. We appreciate it. We've been planning something around this whole idea of AGI and subsequent superintelligence for some time. But I think this book in particular is very important to get us thinking, I guess, more deeply about the topic, not just from a technical aspect, but from the ethical standpoint. So again, Dr. DiCarlo, I really appreciate you joining us. Thank you. And we will see you next time.